Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 32 of the Big Boys Tables podcast. I'm joined, as always, by Musk.
It's not quite 37, but at least we got some doubled chins.
Hell yeah. Listen, there will be a doubling. There will be a doubling right now. This is one of two. So, we're going to be talking about ambition, amongst other things, in this particular episode. Recently, Mesk released a Touch Fluffy Tail podcast, which is furry-friendly. If you're into that stuff, you head on over, take a listen. He talks about ambition, he talks about projects, talks about all sorts of stuff. We're going to try to distill some of the key points that I took away from that. And I've also been contemplating ambition with just looking at how the new game state for Hydra has grown in its documentation. We obviously have very different styles. You even were quoted in the previous podcast saying you don't usually create design documents. You pretty much just fly by the seat of your pants. Whereas I used to be like that, and recently I found reason to invest a little bit more heavily into spending a bunch of time documenting everything, at least as far as it would make sense to do so. Like, obviously you can get too much in the weeds of that and never actually implement anything that you're writing, which was my original fear when I was putting that stuff together. But I think it makes sense to, take another look at the overall experience and say, hey, what can I actually do here? What exactly can we accomplish if we just document all this stuff? And so that is actually one of the things that I am most proud of when it comes to Hydra, is how I have documented all of my ideas. Even if they're bad ideas now, I can always look back at them and say, like, maybe this doesn't fit in quite yet. And you can see an evolution of the concept if you just go back and look at the edit history of certain units and stuff. So just a boon, I suppose. And one of the byproducts of doing that wound up working out for me. But it's definitely an ambitious project. I would say it's just by the fact that it basically is taking the base game and reworking it with a specific design to produce a better game state than Brood War, which is, as we all know, the glass ceiling of RTS, but still the ceiling, all the same, when it comes to multiplayer. And also to be able to create engaging concepts and engaging missions for single player or, co-op. That sort of thing is not, like, especially in those combinations of things, but even separate, you don't really see those in RTS environments. And so it's important for me to acknowledge that this is a very ambitious project. Ambition is, as you said, oftentimes people just think of as a weakness. People think, sometimes you're too ambitious. You make some really ambitious stuff, but you're never going to get anywhere with it or whatever. And, blaming the ambition as opposed to any of the other potential more likely candidates for why a project invariably comes out either slower, never, or just fails to deliver upon its initial promises. So we're going to talk about all that stuff. Should be of note to a couple of individuals who follow the channel. They do indeed oftentimes comment on the fact that there is a lot they want to do, but seemingly so little motivation to do it. And while it's not the same thing as motivation, ambition definitely is linked to it. Generally, when you think of ambition as a descriptive term to a project, or a descriptive term to a product even, you think this project is ambitious. But if there's an ambitious person, if a person has ambition, it usually tends to create a different mental image, at least for most people, or at least for me, I should say. I tend to look at ambition as far as, if somebody has ambition, I tend to look at that as, this person wants something out of their experience here on this mortal realm. They want to do something that many people may not share the desire to do. They might want to create something usually. And in their quest for creating whatever they want to create, they're going to find out a lot about their own limits, what they thought their limits were, and they're going to unlock, hopefully anyways, if they're successful, they're going to unlock a lot more about themselves than they may previously have expected. And so with that in mind, I think I can throw the floor over to you. You might be able to restate some of the ideas that you had, the core concepts that you had when you were recording that Touch Fluffy Tail podcast, and we can use that as a jumping off point.
So, at this point in time, I am actually looking at a bunch of blueprints. And what a blueprint is it's basically a visual scripting thing for C++. And it's not the first time I've looked at blueprints. I've been working off and on with Unreal for years, since Unreal 4, actually since the UDK came out. And I've looked at Unreal Script as far back as Unreal Tournament 99, actually. And I never at any point actually could get into it. The most I've actually done with Unreal is the D&D maps, and I modified existing maps in Unreal Tournament 2004 and stuff like that. And actually, that's kind of it. Because you see, throughout the years, I had a desire to create custom content, and that's only really extended so far. So I've been making custom content since like 1999. I started predominantly with Age of Empires maps and Brood War maps, and then moved on to custom AI for Age of Empires and Brood War. And that basically escalated very quickly to making total conversions. And so when you make a total conversion for Brood War, you need to have, your custom data, your graphics, your sounds, your music. You didn't really need to know programming at all because you couldn't really do anything with it unless you knew ASM, and ASM was pretty difficult to actually get into. Reverse engineering is both time-consuming and requires some degree of competency. I was not very competent, but I did have ambition because I wanted to create things. So the way I saw things back then, leading all the way up to 2006, was I want this. Let's figure out how to make it. So in 2001, I picked up pretty much everything from 3D modeling to music composition. I started music composition with Mod Plug Tracker. I moved on to Cakewalk and Sonar, and eventually had a $300 sound card from Germany, a Teratech DMX 6Fire for Giga Studio for hardware GSIF support. And a lot of that didn't turn out very well. I composed music for about 6 years before giving up. And to this day, my modeling skills have not actually improved since I first picked up Rhino 3D, even though I stuck with that all the way until 2014 with some kit bashing for StarCraft 2 in 2016, 2017. But I didn't really learn because you see learning disabilities and stuff like that. So a lot of things ended up happening in 2006, a lot of really bad things. And that killed a lot of my drive, my desire. And but it didn't really kill that ambition. So I made StarCraft stuff all the way up till 2009. And that is when I last made StarCraft stuff, Armageddon Onslaught survival demo thing, talked about before. And I looked to StarCraft 2 because at that point, StarCraft 2 was coming up. And I was thinking, okay, so what can I do with this and make it bigger? Now, for most people, Armageddon Onslaught is, don't go over there. You're going to knock over my external hard drives. For most people, Armageddon Onslaught is way too big of a project for them because they have, no. You're going to knock over everything. You're going to knock over
Fucking
everything.
cats.
What are you doing? Okay, so Armageddon Onslaught takes the Zerg race and cannibalizes like 2 or 3 tile sets, every unused unit in existence, every unused Flingy and image dat. I think there was maybe like 1 or 2 free. And it adds in all the iScript stuff, a lot of questions that I had unanswered over the years. Was this possible? Was that possible? Et cetera, et cetera. It turned out most of them were impossible, but some of them were sort of possible. Some of them didn't make it into the final release, like the 500 by 500 unit was something I had been made aware of, the possibility of making all the way back to like 2003 or something, but I never had a need for something like that. Armageddon also was like, I'm going to do this. So I had the unfinished model from Sergeant HK for the Tiamat. That made it into the test map, and that was it. And stuff like the Ghost Dragon weren't finished either, and other issues, but it was still a very large project. All things considered, in large part due to the testing, actually. A lot of time went into Armageddon Onslaught for trying to find the crash. So there's this random crash in it, and I'm pretty sure it's from the limit expander, because Disciple of a Dude never even knew how it worked, apparently. There was a period where the limit expander actually fucked up every single turret in the game, where their sorting was fucked, and they would appear underneath the units. So we never really knew how that happened. He didn't really know how that happened, but it mysteriously fixed itself. But there was a crash. So I, in total for that project, I think I spent about 3 months of man hours testing. So I'm really big on the whole testing thing because anybody who doesn't test their projects is dumb, like actually like subhuman, because they don't care. They're literally intentionally wasting their time and they don't care. So they just don't function like normal people, honestly. They don't. Testing is integral. And for most people, I've found like in recently, most people, the concept of testing is too much for them. They can't handle it. Most people do not test their shit. Most people are mongoloids, and not like the good mongoloids, not like the conquering Genghis Khan, towering waifu kind of mongoloid. More like the mongoloids who want to identify as custom content creators but don't have any actual drive to do it. It doesn't matter the scale of the project. Everything has to be unit tested, every single thing. And nobody does it at the corporate level or otherwise. So what does this mean? What does this all mean?
You said that Armageddon Onslaught was too big of a project for most people. Is this sort of what you're getting at here, where it was because of the fact that it required so much testing just to try to identify issues? In the end, you didn't exactly catch the crash, but I'm sure the testing benefited in other ways.
I caught a crash. I caught a very runaway, very weird, very vague runaway issue, where the Prince of Pain's spikes ended a frame before their underlay shadow. And it would be invisible in game, but it was using Springy or not Springy, Flingy. It was using Flingy or image memory. And that would eventually actually eat all of the projectiles, just like Valkyrie rockets, except permanently. So that was one thing I caught after like 2 months, because that was an unusual issue. And I forget the exact cause of it, because they should have been like frame perfect, but they weren't. So that was something I had to fix. Like a lot of these like really weird stuff comes up, and it takes a long time to do it solo, to find it yourself.
Right.
And most people don't do that. Like there are so many basic problems with so many projects that just from what I have seen in your channel alone, that should never have made it to release. Like take for example Antioch Chronicles 3. The performance in that tug of war map was just like that alone should have forced you to scrap the whole thing and try something else. But they didn't.
Well, if you don't test your really long tug of war maps that bring everybody down to 2 FPS, I guess you never know that issue exists, and so you can release it in good conscience.
Yeah. Because they didn't care. They had no ambition, and they didn't give a shit.
Right.
Most people don't give a shit. Like most of these people who make big or small projects, they don't give a shit. What makes something like Armageddon Onslaught beyond the scope of most people is the fact that you have to develop stuff for it. You can't just take hand-me-outs and cobble it together out of middleware. So say, for example, that World of Warcraft Drake that's in there, we had to devise a method how to port that start to finish. There was never nothing ever done like that for Brood War. Nobody has ported anything like that to Brood War before. The vast majority of people right now that are porting stuff to StarCraft to Brood War, like those Koreans, they are actually taking images or frapsing a viewport out of StarCraft 2. That is why they look like absolute shit, why they look really, really weird and smooth because of compression, and why they have perspective on, and why the particles look really bad too, because they're literally just taking it out of fucking viewport shit. That is what they're doing. That's why they look so bad. Nobody wants to do things the proper way. Well, the proper way is to actually extract this asset out of World of Warcraft and then import it into 3ds Max and then configure it for 3ds Max and then configure it for StarCraft, which means the lighting, the camera. And in our case, my case especially, since I don't know how to script stuff, I can't make my own tools. I'm still reliant on third-party tools. But a lot of these assets I took from other games, like say for example Infinity Engine, they don't have their frames arranged in the way you need for StarCraft. So a lot of them, I actually renamed them by hand. Thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of files by hand, one by one by one by one, until Poikert came along and he did a couple of them for me after the fact. But nobody else will do that. Nobody else will want to do that. They'll just find some solution, some easy way out. And that's the problem we're seeing a lot with StarCraft 2, and Warcraft 3 is the shitty kit bashes and stuff like that, where people don't really want to like take parts of something and make them work together. They just take parts out of something and slap them together and call it a day. Somebody showed me a custom Marine kit bash from Mapster, where the guy had taken a Gatling gun from one of the battlecruisers and slapped it on the end of his rifle. So you had this set of barrels that were more higher resolution than the entire Marine model. They still had the specularity settings from the battlecruiser, so they clashed with the Marine model. Like, these guys just don't give a fuck. They don't sit down and actually look at what they're doing. And that's really actually like the core thing with ambition. It's giving a fuck. Now, there is the when I talked in Fluffy Tail about the whole ambition thing, this is something that I heard more in the old days, I guess, before I sort of like proved my waters with Retribution and stuff like that. Is back when people were still, going to Star Alliance and stuff like that in campaign creations. And some comments from people who either were familiar with or descended from there in outside communities I would come across one way or another, is that they thought that I was too ambitious because I was trying to make like total conversions and break into new waters and stuff like that. So obviously I've done other stuff in StarCraft, and that was a lot less successful than stuff in StarCraft. Armageddon Onslaught really, like, it still has that instability in it, but what's in there is more technically competent than the vast majority of StarCraft anything, vast majority of Blizzard anything, period. And that's because there's things in there like using iScript to compensate for decentered frames per direction. I think the Touch of Agony, I think that's its name, one of those demon units that creates white clouds. Its graphic was desynced from the center. Kind of like how StarCraft Remastered's assets are all like that, but they don't fix it. I fixed it through the iScript because I don't know enough about image editing to fix those frames. So I did it through iScript instead. So that's a lot of testing, going back and forth in and out of the game, moving things by individual pixels to try to get it to line up. Not 100% perfect, but way better than what it was by default. Most people aren't going to do that. And I found in a case, a lot of these people who have these criticisms about not like starting or keeping small scale projects or whatever, it's in a lot of cases it's people who don't do anything, people who don't make anything. So in much the same case that there's people who say developers can't be lazy, those tend to be the people who are very lazy, who are very non-interactive, who are very passive. People who don't really have ambition. Now, to really get into the thick of the subject about ambition, you have to kind of define what ambition actually is. Because ambition is not just this singular force. Now, I can't really remember too much about that Touch Fluffy Tail, because honestly, like 2 days is a long time for me right now, because I've been embroiled in just like real life crisis day by day, hour by hour right now. And I've got a lot going on, but ambition is a part of a trinity, because 3. You have passion, you have dream, and then you have ambition. So a dream is something you feel really, really strongly about. When you ask yourself, what it is do I want to do? The most honest response, that's your dream. So when I was talking about in the previous podcast about StarCraft 2 versus Unreal 4, if you had asked me, why do you want to make a StarCraft 2 campaign? I would have said, well, because no one else has, and I think I can do it. Now, if you had asked me, why do you want to make this Unreal 4 ARPG? And I would say, well, because I like the genre. I have played dozens of ARPGs since I started playing console games especially, and pretty much all of them are shit for one reason or another, and I know precisely why they're shit. I know that if I had the skills, I can do better. I can design better than basically all these companies, and it's just a matter of learning it. And so one of those is more profound than the other. One of them has a lot of really strong foundations behind it. Something that I've come back to time and time and time again in my LPs, despite the fact that pretty much all the games I've played from DMC5 to LS1 have all been complete shit. And there's a lot of them I've just thrown right out because they're complete shit. Like Nier Automata, Metal Gear Rising Revengeance. These games are just like QTEs and garbage like that, and mini games and carnival. Fuck that. Just fuck that. I don't have the patience for this trash. But the ones I had the patience for, like DMC3 and DMC4, they've still got a lot of problems. And a lot of problems are really in your face. But a lot of the core driving elements of those games are things I enjoy. You know, like DMC3 was a fairly skill testing game at points. And, you know, it was responsive and it was single player. And it made me improve and stuff like that. And even you could think even to like Dark Souls 3, there was positives in Dark Souls 3 I took away from it. But every single one of these has, you know, innumerable problems I could fix. So that's like one arm of a dream, is to see a game that is A, skill testing, and B, has good AI, and C, you know, has a decent enough setting, and D, doesn't have all this dumb gimmick shit in it, none of these fucking cinematics, none of the grind mechanisms, you know, so on and so forth. And then E, something that only I can make, you know, my setting, my world, my design. And then the other dream, of course, is to see my stuff in motion. So all of my mods from the start have been based on my writing. I don't make fan projects. I think that if you get into something like making a mod or making a game or making a machinima or whatever, if you take somebody else's, especially a company setting, and you use that, you're cheating yourself. You're denying yourself. You're lying to yourself. You're only going halfway. Especially if you get a lot of skill. If you spend a long time with it, if you spend years and years and years with it. Like, for Homeworld 2, the biggest and most complete project that I knew of was the Star Wars project. And I think that guy or another guy who used his assets then made the same thing for Sins of a Solar Empire. To me, those two projects are some of the biggest fucking wastes of time I have ever seen. Ever seen. And all these Warcraft 3 campaigns that you've been playing that take place in Blizzard quote-unquote lore, that's even worse. They're not even making their own assets. They're not even voice acting. They're not even actually putting in effort. They're just taking this hopscotch shit. They're turning Maiev into a guy, and then you end up with Furion and trees and shit and Fel Woofer. None of these people actually gave a fuck about what they were doing, or they were just brain dead. But I'm more inclined to believe that they just actually didn't really care. They didn't really have that dream. They didn't have an honest dream. What's more than likely is that they had deceived themselves into being fanboys and then just wanted to slap something together for funsies. They never really considered it serious. That's why I don't put myself through those kinds of things. That's why I don't play stuff like mods. It's like, that's the first and foremost reason, is that if I played through a mod, I would treat it like I do a game. There would not be a mod that I know of that would hold my attention probably for any more than 15, 20 minutes. I said this before, I tried to play through Flame Knives at one point. I died to Invisible Nothing, and I just left the game and just deleted it. Because it was the dumbest shit. Like, I started, and then my character died to nothing. There was no read. There was no graph. There was no indicator. I just died. Like, the heroes I had just died, and the mission failed.
Yeah, there was
after
gas,
seeing, like, through 15 minutes of pointless exposition. Yes, gas is what I remember. But there was no gas!
No.
You didn't see it!
Hey, your units were in the kill zone. It's over!
Like,
you failed because you're bad.
When you start making a project, and that's how you open your project, just take a step away, unplug your computer, put it in the trash can, don't look back. Become a Mormon or a Buddhist monk. Live in the mountains. Stay away from electricity, stay away from society, or just neck yourself. Just don't do this. Don't do this. Nobody is going to enjoy playing that because it's not gameplay. But first and foremost, as a developer, nobody can honestly say they enjoy making content like this unless it's for the purpose of A, education, or B, humor. Like, I want to be the guy. I want to be a guy is like a Mario meme filled with gotchas, invisible bricks, instant death, QTE kind of stuff. That is a joke. That is a meme. That's a guy having fun. So he slaps it together. It's an incredibly buggy, unstable piece of shit, and it's there. Okay. But there's so very few people who actually take their shit seriously. One of the few people who takes their shit seriously is Toady1 with Dwarf Fortress. How do you know this guy takes his shit seriously? Because he lives off of nothing besides donations. He has been working on this thing for years and years and years and years. He comes back to fix stuff. He supports custom content. He supports people getting involved, but he keeps development largely to himself. He has another guy, I don't know too much about him, but he helps him a little bit off and on with some things. But most of the work is his own, and he keeps it to himself. Dwarf Fortress is long running. You could have amassed a team of 1,000 people behind this, but he doesn't do it because that's not why he does it. And he's fine with it taking a while, and he keeps to it. You know that this is something he feels strongly about. You don't even have to talk to him to know that. It's something you get just by playing it. The level of depth, the level of relative polish. Now, a lot of people are going to look at Dwarf Fortress and be like, I can't play that because of the graphics. I need my lens flares and my chromatic aberration to play my simulation game. Lel, Keck, XD, X3. And then they won't even give it a chance. Even though Dwarf Fortress is more of a game than the entire 2001 plus Blizzard roster combined. Nobody will even give it a chance because they only really care about the graphics. Because they're not really looking to play a game, they're looking to distract themselves. Let's pulls this back. What makes ambition? When you think of a lot of these custom projects you have played, ask yourself a question. What do you feel like the project was to you as a player when you left it? Was it a distraction or was it a gameplay experience?
Oh, yeah.
Not even looking at the actual quality of the project. Just, was it a distraction or was it an experience?
Well, that's the thing, is that at the end of most of my runs of products, official or fan-made or whatever, this extends to all official stuff pretty much. I always say, if I wasn't streaming or recording this shit, I would not have continued after the first 10 minutes because it's not worth my time. It immediately does not grab me. I've never been wrong about this either. I've never warmed up to a game after I've played it. If it didn't grip me in the first few minutes, it was going to be shit. It's pretty much universal. There's always going to be some really obvious flaws with it. And at no point did it ever make clear to me that the developer or developers or the fucking publisher behind it had any desire to make something that was consistent, that actually produced something. Like, it goes back to you talking about ambition. I think it's a very personal thing when somebody plays my shit and then comes away with it feeling some way about it. And I don't think most people who play my shit have ever thought, wow, this is, something, or I guess the point is that they do think something about it, and that says it all. Because most people, when they play a game, they are looking to distract themselves, generally speaking. At least that's been my experience. And when you, as the developer, produce something, and they think at all about what the developer was trying to do or accomplish with their product, that is more thought than they're usually putting into these games. Like, I think very few actual gamers or people who just play, whatever the consumer base you want to call them, very few people in that, umbrella term are going to say, if you surveyed them or whatever, I don't think many of them would say anything about producing thoughts about whatever the developers may have thought or may have wanted or intended. And that shows you that there is very little ambition being manifest in the industry. And I would say that most people who play custom content, like, the most they might think about, that is a little bit more personal, a little bit less, like, mainstream, obviously, so maybe there is a little bit more understanding there. But the most people think about is, I guess the developer wanted this to be hard, so he spawned in a bunch of men. Like, it's never any fucking, real well thought out position on behalf of the pleb who's playing. And that pleb is, capable of that thought. It's not like they chose to just be a complete retard for all existence. They are capable of playing something that actually does have effort put into it, that self-evidently has effort put into it. They are capable of playing that and then saying, "Oh, I can see why this is different." I mean, in Consummate 2017, this is a shit fucking campaign, man. It's terrible. I've watched playthroughs of it all the time. And recently, actually, there was a new one. Occult System I forgot to announce this. I made a post on my YouTube channel, but I forgot to actually like direct people towards it or link it anywhere. But that's out there. Occult System finished his playthrough finally. And this guy is actually really interesting to watch because it's something very different than most people who play campaigns do. He doesn't do commentary. He edits together bits and pieces of the action, and he shows all of the cutscenes and dialogue and briefings. And so he gives you basically like a abridged version of the experience. And so as a developer, for me, it's very telling what parts he includes of the gameplay and what parts he doesn't.
Yeah.
So he'll include like cases where his hero died and he had to, reload, or cases where he failed because his buildings got destroyed or whatever. And so you'll see like sort of if you compare his other uploads to the ones about in Consummate, it's even more obvious there that he's like showcasing, particular fights that he thought were notable for some reason. And the only way that I can see those being notable, and then I think the reason why the running time of his in Consummate videos tends to be longer than the other ones, is because he's showing you that there's more notable fights here. So even the shittest fucking
it's something
product,
he wants you to see.
Yeah.
Like what he puts in front of you is telling.
Yeah, exactly.
Of what he wants you to see as a viewer.
Right. And so as him editing all that stuff together, making a montage, even of the shittiest product I've released, it's still invocative of the fact that this guy actually enjoyed his time with it and could see that there was effort put into it. It wasn't all dedicated. Like if you had the same amount of effort and the same amount of man hours, I would allocate them completely differently now than I did then. So, there's obviously some really lackluster areas, and it was for the benefit of learning. I learned a lot about stuff related to AI and map design, but it's objectively way worse than what I wanted. Like from what my intention was, the delivery system was completely inadequate for that sort of thing. And so even looking at that, I could say this is terrible. But despite the fact that it's the worst campaign I've produced, and it's just the most underwhelming, we'll say, it's still, like, you can see the difference in the player base. People have commented to me all the time saying, especially more when it was more in the public consciousness because it had just been released, some years ago, people said all the time, wow, I can really see how you put effort into stuff. And I did put effort into stuff. They're not wrong about that. And even if we disagree about the quality, or if they subjectively enjoyed it more than other campaigns or whatever, I can still understand where they're coming from when they say, yeah, you clearly put more effort into this stuff. That stuff just shows off the bat because I had an ambition to tell a story, and I wanted to do so without sidelining player agency. And I wanted to use the RTS method to sort of augment the storytelling capabilities instead of just having a story and then that overriding some elements of the RTS, and then the RTS being like overriding some of the storytelling because they're completely disconnected, obviously. So like most of the time, that's what you see. And so I think there's another example, I suppose, more personal example of how ambition ends up getting manifest from the perspective of a developer who's produced something, who's had people say, wow, I can see that you really tried here. Like, at the very least, they can see I tried, regardless of whether or not I succeeded. So that's already a step above, and more so towards the example of Dwarf Fortress that you were talking about than, just the average disconnected, AAA quote-unquote industry product, or even the average campaign that, doesn't really see any updates, that you report bugs to them and they say, cool, thanks. Like, you remember the fucking Malfurion's Quest ship. That was obviously insane. But the campaign that I played before that was made by Svetli, and it was a ripoff of Malfurion's Quest, and it was called The Fate of Ashenvale. Now, aside from The Fate of Ashenvale having Bear Blower in it, it's really only notable because of the fact that it's just a ripoff. It's very obviously a ripoff. And I don't know that Svetli had any ambition to do anything. But mostly, it was much more crystal clear to me whether he didn't have ambition or he was just incompetent. Because he was clearly both. Well, he was clearly incompetent, we'll say. And I didn't know if the second piece was there. I didn't know if he just had no ambition or if he was actually willing to learn. And yet, when I played the first version of the campaign that I inevitably went back and played again, I found so many bugs in the first couple of missions. And Svetli's comment was, I guess I'll need to contact the exterminator for all these bugs, winky face. And he just didn't care. He didn't give a fuck. He had no desire to actually do anything about that. There was no fucking desire for him to go and fix it. No like not even anything that hinted at him taking responsibility for it. It was just like, oh, that's silly that happened, LOL. Like that was the equivalent. Like that's what you got. Like there's nothing.
That's Blizzard attitude, man.
Yeah, and that's like 100% Blizzard attitude. Like usually they try to fix some stuff, but of course a lot of the really crippling issues never get fixed. This guy didn't even fucking acknowledge that there was any problems. Like he treated it like it was I found an Easter egg or something. I don't know. Like it's really weird. Like just the way that he described it. Just sorry about that. I don't even think he said that. He just said, "I'll get the exterminator." I don't know, man. I like that. I like getting the exterminator. That's a good response to me seeing like floating bears or whatever. So there's some more anecdotes.
Wasn't that the guy who was like he didn't even test his own shit?
Yes, that is the man who sent it to I sent it to a guy to test it. That was his comment when I asked him if he tested his own shit. But that guy's like 16,
Holy
so
fuck.
like I can more so understand it. I mean, it's still terrible.
Dude,
it's still
when I
damning.
was 16. I had been modding for 5 years.
Listen,
Like, I was testing stuff.
oh yeah, I'm not apologizing for him at any point. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, you can see where you might be more forgiving of somebody that young if they then show that they want to learn despite their age and despite their incompetence. Of course, he did not.
Like, why would he even post this if he didn't even know it actually worked himself or not?
Well, like I said in my stream, the first time he had seen half of his campaign was when he was watching me stream it. So,
wow,
that's really what you get.
Wow.
Yeah.
Like that is so fucking far-fetched for me because, I mean, like, for every StarCraft project I've ever released, there's been another dozen I haven't.
Right, exactly.
And, I mean, a lot of them weren't really finished, but there was probably more content in them than that campaign, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
And, what I said is that, passion isn't the only thing you need. Obviously, you need a dream and ambition and passion, but StarCraft 2 and Warcraft 3 are very good at killing passion. I've discovered that. Workflow and UX and stuff like that, how much, what does it take for you to actually build something, and how much can you actually push yourself to do it? Well, Antioch Chronicles 3 was showing me that the project leads for not having a fun time. They were very apologetic, but they were also very clearly jaded by Blizzard. They just kept coming up with excuses instead of just accepting the fact that Blizzard didn't actually give a fuck, even though the one guy who used a Macintosh very commonly ran into issues where he couldn't even do anything with the editor because Blizzard would just break it and then just ignore the fact it was broken because little Macintoshes. But, little Macintoshes
that same person,
or whatever.
That fucking Macintosh guy is the guy who said trees are less colonial and developers can't be lazy. So,
yeah. Even though he was literally face to face with the fact that, low Macintosh, you can make fun of Macintoshes all you want, but the fact is, Blizzard says they support Macintosh, so when they obviously don't, the only correlation you come up with is they just don't care because they're lazy. And it's literally right in his face for months at a time, and then he tries to defend them anyway. It's like, I honestly think he's just a very good troll. I think it's a pretty good bait, because it's hard to believe that people can actually be that stupid. But I probably shouldn't say that because I've been surprised many, many times before. But these are also the people who are very conscious about how much time goes into something, and instead of, I mean, okay, so Blizzard says it's done when it's done, and obviously they are lying because everybody in a corporate world has a deadline, and they meet that deadline no matter the cost. But that is not the case for custom projects.
And that is a good mantra to live by too. It should be done when it's done. You shouldn't be rushing it out the door. You certainly shouldn't be like forgetting to test and all this other stuff. Like the thing is, what gets me about people who say that they don't understand where I came from. I understand it too, because there's people out there where before I got to my level now, and I'm sure that this fallacy still exists in my head somewhere, and I just haven't identified it quite yet. But before I got to the level I'm at now, where I'm constantly grinding, I'm constantly doing all this work, I looked at people who had way better track records, I suppose, for this sort of thing. So, for example, there's an investigative journalist, but mostly like an opinion journalist, an op-ed guy, who calls himself the esports historian. His name is Thorin. That's his screen name. And he produces content very regularly. He's on He's got crazy opportunities now, and like he was always grinding. But I only found him after he had already started that. So I missed all the awkward phases. Like, I didn't hear any of his shit from, like, 2009, 2001. Like, he's been doing this for years, like, decades. And I missed all that stuff. So I didn't get to see him on the rise. I didn't get to see his evolution as a content creator. And, you know, I was probably in fucking diapers back then anyway. But the bottom line is that I missed all of the gestation period of that. So all I see is this butterfly. I don't see the fucking cocoon. Didn't even know a cocoon existed. Didn't know what he was before that. And he opened up about some of this stuff on his side channel where he talks about his path to the level he's at now. And he talks about how this exact thing where people just assume that he's really good at public speaking because that's what one of the things he's known for is being able to banter and being able to really make people laugh and like has good comedic timing, able to, you know, talk with any number of personalities, get the most out of interview subjects. Like he's a very well-rounded character in that sense. But he was tremendously, you know, what would you say, socially awkward as time goes on. When he was opening up, he used to like cut recordings, cut interviews, you know, just a few minutes in or maybe earlier than you would want to for the sake of the content because he felt awkward about the situation. And he was giving that as an example. It's like the same thing with me. Like I used to make fucking micro maps. Like it's the same fucking thing. Like I used to just be a retard. And, you know, me getting to this level where I'm at now, I mean, obviously the discipline and being able to say, yes, I work all this time. Like I spend, you know, X number of hours a day on my work or whatever. I try to make sure that I live a balanced life around that and doing all the other stuff that I do. Like that is more of a personal thing than just making micro maps or not making micro maps. But that's a good example. It's like a quintessential just bedrock. And people think that once you get to a certain level, like when you were making Armageddon Onslaught, you released that. Like even back then when I was seeing that, I was thinking, wow, there's no way I ever make anything like that now. Or like in the future, like that's just so far beyond me, right? And so like that's the same fallacy in your head is you think it's out of reach. You think it's something completely different. You think like people out there say like you know it's weird for me to say this like back because it seems like I'm sucking my own dick. I swear I'm not yet anyway. But like people say like, oh, your content inspires me to make my own content, or at least like hold other people to task when I'm playing other content, like official content or whatever. Like thinking more actively about this stuff, and that to me is really, really nice to hear. But it's not because like of my ego. It helps, I suppose, but that's not really the reason why it's beneficial for me. The reason why I really enjoy hearing that is because I want more people to hold people to task so that we can get better products. Ideally, like the whole reason, like people say, oh, you must not enjoy video games if you don't like Half-Life or whatever fucking psychotic shit comes out of their mouth half the time. And like the thing is, like I do enjoy games. I enjoy good games. I am an elitist. I have standards. Like I want only the best of the best. I don't want to fucking celebrate shit because it's shit. That's the whole point, is not to celebrate that stuff. And so in a roundabout way, what I'm saying is you don't get to this point where you and I are at right now and where we will go in the future when we increase our productivity and get even better, even more competent as time goes on, as we continue to learn, we continue to grow. You don't get to this point just overnight. It is a long process, but it's also not as complicated as you think. Like it's actually really basic. And the more you understand the basics, the better it is. So we're pulling behind the curtain here. We're peering behind the curtain anyways. We're pulling back the curtain. English. And we're figuring out a way to properly, you know, showcase this sort of thing to the viewers and help them along on their path as well. Because like if you can take shortcuts, like it's the same idea. Like if you could take a time travel machine back and you know, yell at your younger self from like 10 years ago, like what would you say? What would be the most beneficial things for you to learn? Like that sort of thought experiment, right? So it's like the same sort of idea, is that if somebody had short-circuited a lot of the growing pains, then that would help. But in some ways, having to do it the slow way taught me the discipline in the first place to say, I am going to sit here and rename like a bunch of Boko file names from Priority to Survive because I didn't want Boko in my mod. It's the same thing that you were talking about with your, I think you said it was something engine. I don't remember what. Infinity Engine?
Frames.
Yeah, you were pulling frames and renaming thousands of files. Like I had to do that for Priority to Survive shit. And it turns out that's just for a placeholder graphic too. That's not even for like something that's going to be final. So you can critique the time selection. Like you can say, you could be spending your time better, sure, but that doesn't mean anything. Like that doesn't mean that you know, it's a bad thing that I'm willing to put that kind of time in. I just should target select better, basically, and that's a fine thing to critique. But if you're not willing to put that time into anything, then you're not serious about your project, as far as I'm concerned. That goes back to the ambition thing. And so as long as you have the ambition to improve, as long as you have the like you have the, that's the wrong word choice, I guess. But going back to your Trinity, right? You have the dream to make something, like your whatever you really want to do with your life. You have the ambition that, like, I don't know how you would separate those two in particular, but for my money, it's like ambition and motivation. Like your ambition is to make your dream, and your motivation is what makes it like the day to day. Like that's what allows you to get the work done whenever you're getting the work done, and it's in service to this ambition. It's in service to this dream, and so like that's really the biggest thing that I can tell people is just do it. Just do the work. Like sit down and work on it, and put the hours in. Like that's all you need to do is as long as you're consistent with that across a long enough time span, you will make something, even if it's not finished, even if you never release it, even if you know it's not as great as you wanted it to be. It'll be better than what you were like this time last year. It'll be better than what you were this time 10 years ago, whatever. Like the point is to improve, and these projects are just sort of a medium for that. Of course, if you may have a different point, like your dream or your ambition, your ultimate goal will be to produce some kind of content, I'm sure, but along the way there, everything that you do is in service to not just that dream, but also to help you improve so that you can comfortably take on that task. Or maybe not comfortably, you'll still probably be challenging yourself, but at least take on the task in the first place. So.
I forgot where I was.
Hi.
Yeah, numlock. I'm using the numpad to talk to the microphone, so I must have hit that somehow.
Oh, okay. So you're back now.
Yeah, I'm back now.
Okay.
So like, I forgot where I was.
Well, I was just
Yeah,
I finished ranting about
Yeah.
trying to separate ambition and dreams and all this other stuff. So.
Yeah. So I was saying that passion is different than ambition, because ambition is your willingness to endure hardship and see something through and not compromise. So obviously, when you're dealing with StarCraft 2, it's all compromises because StarCraft 2 is not really capable of that much, and the pipeline is really, really prohibitive. So if you treat something as a very non-compromising manner, where you say, I'm going to do this and nothing's going to stop me, like say, for example, the AI, even if you can accomplish it, it takes a lot more effort than it really should. So that doesn't necessarily mean that your ambition is bad. There's not necessarily a upper limit to ambition where it suddenly becomes a bad idea. Now, I could say, my goal is to motion cap all of my own animations. That is a very lofty goal, but it's not necessarily impossible. If I had a Kinect or a VR system, I could actually do that. And I do have enough skills that I could probably doctor the animations so they wouldn't be completely fucked afterwards. All I'd really have to learn is rigging. But it's a very ambitious goal because I don't have any money. And a Kinect is expensive, and VR is expensive. And if I was to get any of these setups, I'd have to be able to afford it, and then have to be able to learn how to actually do it. So I manage my stuff accordingly because I look at it also from a passion perspective. I'm coming out from a decade of bad projects and bad decisions, from Sins of a Solar Empire to StarCraft 2 to even Warcraft. I actually worked on Warcraft 3 several times in the last couple of years. Age of Wonders 2, so on and so forth. And a lot of these projects weren't necessarily bad decisions because of something I did other than choices I made, like involving other people, for example. Retribution was an enormous project, had years of work put into it. I think that if you completed the assets I had, the ship assets, and liquidated them into the value of stuff I see on the Unreal Marketplace, I think they're actually worth thousands to tens of thousands of dollars. The man hours are worth more than that. The reason why the assets are so low compared to the man hours is because I'm not a good modeler. But compared to the quality of the assets I see people selling on stuff like Turbo Squid and Unreal and Unity marketplaces, the stuff I made for Retribution is actually extremely valuable time-wise and asset-wise. So if you looked at it purely from that perspective, it wasn't necessarily too ambitious to say, I'm going to make all these assets, because I did. But I wasn't able to make character assets. It's very ambitious to say, I'm going to come up with this project, even though I don't actually have a surefire solution to making character assets. That's where relying on a third party came from. It's The most ambitious part of that project is the dependency on a third party. If you involve a third party, you are throwing so much potential ass pain into the mix. And I have talked about that before, so I'm not really going to go too in depth on that. But suffice to say, when you throw in completely unknown variables and stuff you just don't actually have answers for, that's where ambitious may seem dangerous. But it's not necessarily dangerous if you yourself can learn, can adapt, or make ends meet in some manner to reach your goals. That's where passion comes in. Because passion will say, this is hardship, but I will endure it. So I talked about the vertex checksum error and how that consumed so much of my time in the past. But I endured years and years and years and years and years of this dumb shit with Sins of a Soul Empire and that vertex checksum error until we discovered the cause of that. Why? Because I gave a fuck. Because I had all this shit surrounding me that I had absolute confidence in, like sound effects and particles, and I wasn't willing to let the vertex checksum error take all that down. Because I cared about the project, I cared about the dream, and I wanted to see the ambitions fulfilled. Now we look to present day with my contention with StarCraft 2 and Unreal 4 and Apex J. Apex J is technically within my ability to create. I have the functional AI, I know the data is possible, and I can make the assets I need. But I'm looking at a very difficult pipeline. I'm looking at a pipeline in which I cannot import StarCraft 2 assets into 3ds Max without them being seriously fucked up to the point that I'm probably going to be putting in double the man hours just to try to fix them, if I can fix them, to get them to the stage where I can actually start doing what I want to do on them. So there's a significant barrier between me being able to do what I want to do. And I touch on this every now and then when we talk about these specific subjects, is you're not building a project for a player. You're building a project for yourself. It doesn't matter what your end goal is. If you're building a tech demo for a conference that's never going to see the light of day other than that. If you're building something you're putting in together for a game jam or a con or something to try to win a tournament, the thing is that is a momentary, brief thing compared to the amount of man hours and energy and sweat and blood and semen you're going to put into your project. And at that point, it doesn't even matter what your skill level actually is. It's still time you put into something. Skill is just something that help compensate for time. You know how to do things more efficiently. You don't have to learn things, etc., etc., etc. It's still time. And all that time is predominantly spent with yourself. Hands on your cock like a joystick, flying through fields of interns. You are trying to build something, and that something, for this time being in which you are building it, is being experienced only by yourself. The more time you spend doing something you do not enjoy, you do not have passion for, you do not find substance in, the less passion you're going to have coming out of it. Passion is effectively fuel. It's gamer fuel, but for developers. It's like fucking, I don't know, Gatorade or gasoline or something, or marmalade or soy. I guess for California, it would be soy. You can think of it as soy. And if you run out of soy because you spend so much time fucking around with something and getting nothing done, you know, dealing with bugs or problems or whatever, which is why people like to sweep bugs under the rug, because bugs don't make cool patch notes. That's actually one of the reasons why people ignore bugs, is because they don't make cool patch notes. That's one of the reasons why Blizzard avoids them, for example. It's much more interesting on your patch note to say we added a new feature than we fixed an old feature. It doesn't matter if that old feature crippled half the game. It's just not as interesting for a casual to read that you fix something rather than introduce something new, because casuals have the attention span of a fruit fly.
Well, that's why you don't want casuals in your project.
Yeah, at the same time, I don't necessarily believe in such a thing as a casual gamer. You either have a gamer or you don't. You know, you either have somebody who's engaged or they're not engaged. If they're not engaged, they're not playing a game. You have to devise some kind of mechanism to weed them out so you never have to worry about them. So you preferably never have to acknowledge their existence. But before you even reach that point, it's you. It's about you. It's about your energy. It's about your passion. And chances are, if you're at the stage where you're thinking, it's too ambitious, I don't really want to do that, there's one of two things going on. First of all, you're inexperienced. And that's fair. If you're inexperienced, you take things piecemeal. And that's how you learn. I don't dive into making fucking motion cap animations of my own until I know anything about animation. And I don't. So, that'd be great. I would love to do my own animations, but I'm not going to be able to. So I don't worry about that. I keep it realistic. So what I'm doing right now is I'm porting a World of Warcraft asset, and I'm remastering that. Same thing as I do in StarCraft 2. Now, I'm doing something here I never thought I'd be doing. For me, it's very ambitious. I actually have replicated World of Warcraft's behavior, in which you have a standing attack animation, and then that animation blends half the body when you're moving. I've already done that. I walked into this a couple days ago, and I've only had a few hours to actually spend on it. And I'm already at the stage now where I can start thinking about creating an opponent that you can apply some damage to. I have already configured the hit collision on my swords. I've already got the animation notifiers fired up and connected. All that awaits for me now is to actually make damage registering events and then work on the damage reception events on the other character. What does this mean? It means I've done something I haven't done before. It means that I have advanced in something and learned something. Along the way, I've learned a lot of very interesting things, like the fact I don't understand basic logic at all. That the way in which Booleans and conditions work is actually inverse of how I think internally. So a lot of this stuff that I'm talking about is actually extraordinarily simple. Extraordinarily simple. But it's difficult for me because I'm actually pretty stupid. I do not learn things very quickly. I do not think of things logically. This is why, even though I can read C and read C++ and kind of understand what's going on, I can't actually write it. Because the way my brain works, it doesn't really sync up with that. It's hard for me to wrap my head around things. And the same was with Blueprint. Blueprint was actually worse for me. I'm going to see if I can find you an image here so I can show you precisely what it is I'm talking about. And let me just see here. Actually, I'm going to get you an image, but let me just pop into...
I feel like I might have something similar to what you're talking about with that, though, because I understand what programming should be doing, but maybe it's just that I don't understand, like, I can get the syntax, I guess, but I don't always know how to refer to certain constructs or certain elements of an environment, and I really take a long-ass time to learn what the environment actually refers to. I guess if I just spent more time actually doing it, I would figure it out. But that's definitely something I don't have a lot of drive to do, is stare at a Visual Studio or whatever for hours in the day.
So I sat down when this cat shit started a couple days ago, when we were going through this. And I thought a real long and hard time about where all my time was actually going. Because I didn't really have anything else to do, because I was watching a cat for days at a time. And I still don't really have much else to do, because I'm still watching a cat for days at a time, because that's the way things are going to be now. And it grounds you back in things, because I'm an escapist kind of person. I like distraction. I like to not be reminded that real life is a thing, because real life for me is very unpleasant. I don't like it. Which means that I'm quite content with just doing nothing, doing nothing. But I'm also too content with that. Now, much like you, when I look back at my old projects, I don't like what I see. And for me, it's very demoralizing, because I think, I recognize all these problems I had, but I haven't been able to learn from that. I haven't been able to improve from that. I have all these sort of half-baked skills that I picked up along the way, like ripping stuff from games, textures, making FFX stuff. I can make stuff. And like I said before, I have absolute, complete 100% confidence that if it wasn't for the tools, I could make a StarCraft 2 campaign that would be unrivaled for years to come. It would be the first and last of its kind as a build and destroy campaign with gameplay. And I know because I already have all these tests and stuff that say, hey, you've gotten places. This is what you can do. You've made great effects. You've made great parts. You've made great sounds. You've got AI. You've got all these tools together. But that doesn't mean you have a project either. That's demoralizing, especially when you've spent 9 years working with that game. And all you have to show for it is some voice acting and some assets and some technical art and a bunch of forgettable projects. They may be some of the biggest projects for StarCraft 2. I don't think you could say StarCrafts and Dwarven Combat are not like at the top level of that game in terms of what, the scale of the stuff that was made and how significant they were. But that doesn't mean anything to me. Like I said before, that doesn't mean anything to you. To me, that is not fulfillment. If all I've done with something is contribute to another person's project, I feel down. I feel depressed because I get no substance out of that. To me, it's a nothing burger. I just don't give a fuck. And it's not even about the fact that I didn't get, paid from Pirate, or I didn't get credited from StarCraft until very recently, or whatever. Like, it doesn't matter because it's not my project. I only find fulfillment in bringing my dreams to life. I don't care about other people's shit. I do it either because I, treat them as a friend, or I'm getting compensated for some matter. For me, I look at StarCraft 2 and I think, I've probably invested 20,000, 30,000 hours into this game. Developing, researching, and making stuff like StarCraft's possible. If it wasn't for me, this project wouldn't exist. Because there was no one else who could do what I could do. There was no one else. I trained HKS. If it wasn't for me, they wouldn't have HKS. They literally would have no one. The project wouldn't exist. $90,000 would go straight to weed instead of $80,000. So when I looked at that, I thought I have an obligation to myself to justify the amount of time I've put into this. Kind of like how I struggled a lot with videos. So we're talking about Thorin.
Right.
And he started very low-key. And I am not familiar with him, but I'm familiar with the name because he comes from StarCraft. And that name has been brought many times in StarCraft. It's a name I've known about for years and years and years back when I was still at Team Liquid. And I don't know anything about him. I don't know his story. But it's a story very similar to mine. My early casts on the website, the StarCraft 2 stuff, those are not actually my early casts. Those are actually my mid-casts. I have done videos as far back as 1996, 1997, 1995. I recorded all kinds of shit on VHS. And I made my first XXEs, which are compilations, on the VHS with the N64 and stuff like that. My first vocal commentated video was around 2004, 2005. And my first LP, I believe, was Mystic Quest, somewhere around 2006, 2007. Of course, the Stabby Man series is actually the oldest video series I have publicly available. That is my first time editing stuff in Sony Vegas. I think other than X6E. Well, it's my first major editing. And that is the World of Warcraft series. The very early end with Orc Rogue, Stabby Man. It's a very juvenile, very rough around the edges series. There's no voice commentary at all, except for a tiny little bit of voice acting here and there. And that wasn't available until somewhat recently when Zilla asked for it, and I re-uploaded it. If you look between the years of these projects, you definitely wouldn't think that I had experience in voice acting, because I'm not good at speaking. Like, I'm bad in these podcasts, and I know my quality doesn't sound very good in these podcasts because Discord is using Speaks, and Speaks is garbage. But, well, Opus is just Speaks. And, but it's a lot worse back then. Even processed, a lot worse. And it's bad. Like, today it's bad, but back then it was much worse. And it's easy to forget your own progress. It's very easy to forget your own progress. But recently I re-uploaded a bunch of my StarCraft 2 stuff to my site. There's about 58 replays there. And before then, like in 2007, 2006, I actually couldn't watch those videos because to me, they were so bad that I could not bear watching them. I couldn't stand my own voice. I couldn't stand the processing. But to put them on the site, I had to verify them. I had to make sure they were working. I had to make sure there was nothing I needed to edit. Lo and behold, a lot of them needed fixing. I can reprocess the audio. There was aspect ratios that had to be fixed, stuff like that. And that is when it struck me. I've improved over the years. Not just a little bit, but a lot. A lot. There is analysis in some of those videos that is not very good. Not necessarily because it's inaccurate or whatever, but one of the issues I have with talking is I tend to find a subject, or I'm directed to a subject, and then I tend to lose track of that because I go to something related and then I forget what the original subject was. And I've always stood by the mantra that the worst air is dead air. That is what Zilla told me. He smokes weed. I trust him. He's also a DJ. And like he says, the worst air is dead air. So he mastered the art of monologuing. And he can go on for a monologue in his deadpan voice for fucking hours about the most random shit. But it keeps you talking. It keeps the energy going. Back then, I hadn't trained around that, though. But the StarCraft analysis videos is when I started training around that. Because my first recordings, especially like the Wings of Liberty LP, there's not much talking going on at all. And I wasn't into doing the review process. I wasn't into vocalizing stuff. I had to train myself to do that. But the StarCraft videos, these casts were a little after that, about a year or so after that. I had begun to train myself in this. And it showed. I was more talkative and everything. But a lot of that is not even like small talk or banter. It's just like pointless. Because I'm more focused on avoiding dead air than I am about either taking a subject and exploring on it or finding something to talk about. Now, of course, you can say, yes, it's StarCraft 2. Nothing is going on. There's only so much you can talk about. That's true. But in these specific cases, there was a lot I could have talked more about. I felt especially in like the FFAs and stuff. And but I look today at my more modern casts like Warcraft 3, for example, which are casted in times of very low activity. I'm not a regular person. I don't release regular stuff. I can't keep motivated or consistent enough to even compare to your productivity. You stream almost every day or every second day, and you're doing all this stuff on the side. I'm lucky if I can record a segment of a video every 3 months, which is pretty fucking terrible. So I was much more productive back then for StarCraft. But even so, like I felt my Warcraft 3 cast was better by a tremendous margin over the stuff I had done even like 2 or 3 years ago. The quality is better. The pacing is better. The commentary is better. It's one of those things that's hard to measure just looking back in your memory. It's something you actually need material to compare for.
Yeah, I agree.
But it's there. It's there. And the StarCraft videos really opened my eyes to that when I forced myself to go through them. It was forcing myself to face myself from 10 years ago, 9 years ago, and say, this is the content you created. These were the standards by which you released that content. For better or for worse, that's what it was. And to me, it's like a lifetime ago. So much has happened since then. The loss of the home, all the cap problems, financial disaster, starvation, absolute fucking ruin everywhere. Ruin. Just chaos. Void and fill. Just everything has fucking changed. It feels like that's not even me talking. But it is. It is. And like I said, I face this contention with this project where I've wanted to get into Unreal for years. First, it was to make an RTS. I wanted to make RTSs for a long time, but I grew out of that, actually. And then I wanted to make an ARPG, and I thought, nope, that's too much. So I'm going to make a machinima, and I wanted to make a machinima, and I never even tried. Because turrets and animation, I was too scared to even figure it out, so I didn't. So I would kind of like retreat back to StarCraft 2 because I would tell myself, well, I know how to make AI and particle effects and stuff. And I'd go into StarCraft 2 and then I would do nothing. If anything, I would go back to making videos. I would find excuses to avoid it. And if you're finding excuses to avoid something, I've got a secret for you. You're not actually interested in it. You're not. You may want to do something. You may want to do something. But if you find yourself procrastinating or avoiding work, you're not actually passionate about it. You're not actually in it. That's the difference between ambition and passion. What kept me going through casting, even during the fact that I don't get any kind of compensation, I don't get any kind of fame or publicity, I actually actively avoid all this stuff. I had almost 1.5 million views on YouTube before I started hiding videos because I was tired of getting PMs about subscriptions and shit like that. The fact I went through all this shit, and the fact I was a shitty caster and knew I was shitty and felt very, very awkward with spoken sentences and dialogue and explaining anything and kept with it was because, you know what? I enjoy the concept of capturing video and reliving moments, especially in moments of entertainment. That's why I did that on the VHS, because I had very, very limited access to a lot of things. I was a VHS pirate. I fully, freely, and proudly admit I recorded a very, very large amount of television shows on VHS and held onto them because we would only have cable TV maybe once a month for a year at best. So during that period, I would harvest things on the VHS and they would stick with me. And that just translated into like tape decks and making, voice acting on the tape deck and other stuff like that. There was something about capturing a memory and experience and holding on to it and reliving it and re-enjoying it because escapism. It's always about escapism. Because I didn't have anything else. And I've never had anything else. And that's where the projects come from. But that's something that you're always directly involved with. You are casting. You are playing a game. You're recording. You're making those memories. You're making those videos. When it comes to making a project, if you are not making the project, there's a very simple reason why. You don't like it. You're not passionate about it. You don't really feel in it. So that's why you have people being really conscious about schedules and stuff for mods, because they're not in it for the mods. It's like I've always said, the end product and people always tell you through their body language the mindset of the developer, even if the developer himself does not speak. When you look at a Blizzard product, especially something like Diablo 2 or StarCraft, Diablo 3 even Diablo 2, but Diablo 3 and StarCraft 2, World of Warcraft, Overweight, these projects exude laziness everywhere. From fucked lighting to fucked topology to fucked sounds to the deadpan voice acting to the bland soundtrack to the complete lack of writing to the design of the missions. Nobody really cared. Nobody really cared. They just didn't care. How can you tell they didn't care? Because it's poor. The quality is bad. And even if somebody is not very good at what they do, they will try to improve because they want to improve because they're passionate about something. Passion comes hand in hand with self-improvement. When I looked at this Unreal 4 project, and even right now, I'm looking at it right now, I am faced with a very large amount of anxiety. That anxiety is fear. I am afraid of failure. I am afraid of being unable to learn things because I have quite the Herculean task in front of me. Yes, I can rip assets from games and change them and maybe they will work for what I'm doing. So in many ways, I'm avoiding a large sum of work, but I still need to learn how to do this. I'm not walking into StarCraft and changing some lines of AI. I actually need to write my AI largely from scratch. I have functions and some examples to work from somewhere. I have to find them, but there's probably something on YouTube. But that's actually all I have. When I go into this and I start making my first opponent, I'm going to try to fight once I make this damage system, because I also have to make the damage system largely from nothing. That AI script will be blank. I won't have start town, build 5 Zergling, and then attack, and then change it to build 6 Zergling, and then attack later. I will have literally nothing. I'm starting from nothing, as opposed to StarCraft 2, where I had something. I've basically thrown away almost every single thing I've ever done in my entire life. I have a few set of skills that I can kind of translate, such as, for example, the ability to rip those assets, the sound effects and voice acting, my understanding of particle systems, and things like that. But the systems in which I'm working with and the methods in which I'm working with them, they're alien. They're completely, completely alien. I'm starting largely from nothing. And I'm discovering that the way in which I think, the way in which I operate, and the way in which I disseminate and read information is in many ways polarized to the way in which things like, for example, C++ or blueprints actually work. So my learning disabilities comes with the fact I actually need to unlearn things and think things in different ways and read information in different ways than I'm accustomed to. That, for me, is very scary. That is very, very scary. But you know what? I'm trying to do it. I'm trying to do it for a variety of reasons. One of those reasons is because I want to play this. I want to make an AI that's actually really aggressive and does stuff. And I want to have a combat system which I can engage it that is also really aggressive and does stuff. Because I'm taking things from my DMC3 experience with the Virgil fights that I found somewhat rewarding. And I think there's ways I can change this and make this interesting. But also because I want to see my stuff in motion. Even if it just comes down to hearing my sounds and my voice and stuff like that. It's been a very long time. But for me, there is a certain reward, a certain vindication to seeing something that I have created in front of me in a game, or even in a video. There's still some certain reward to that. Like I said, for StarCraft 2, there's a big barrier between you and that. But in this, right now, I can hop in, I can attack. I don't do damage, but it's there. The animations and the setup and everything else I've slapped together in the last couple of days, it's there. My work is real. My investment is real. It's manifested. It's already there. There was none of that barrier. That didn't exist. Because although Unreal 4 has many problems, it is a toolset designed for people to create things with. Very, very much unlike anything Blizzard has ever put together, which is just a hodgepodge of shit just slapped together without second thought. Epic, at least until Fortnite became very successful, lived or died in large part due to the success of Unreal Engine, be it Unreal Engine 4, 3, or prior. Licenses and other games published with their material is where they succeeded from. And I would say that right now their tutorial material is very, very lacking. But the tool set itself is distinctly unlike StarCraft 2's editor, in that this actually makes sense in many cases. There is actually things in here that make sense, that are designed to improve your workflow, that are logically set up. So even though I don't know what I'm doing, I have been able to get this far. And you mentioned looking off of an example and aspiring to that with Armageddon Onslaught. There was one more thing I want to add to this. And that is one of the videos I'm watching right now. I think it's from some European guy. He is definitely ESL. He talks very, very slowly and kind of mumbles his words. It's most certainly not the best of casts, but I've experienced that the vast majority of people who make tutorial videos are recording with a Radio Shack microphone and have their sibilants cranked up to absurdly high levels and thump all over the place and give me headaches within 5 minutes, and they have 170,000 subscribers and beg for Patreon pay pegs. Whereas this guy, he's some random nobody. However, he has some tutorial videos that discuss some of the stuff I'm trying to do. And he is also trying to make an ARPG. And to be quite fair, it doesn't look that good. But it's quite a few steps ahead of me. He has functional AI. He has a functional blocking system. He has, boss battles and stuff like that. It's very crude looking, very silly, but he has a functional project. I looked at that and I saw that as a beacon of inspiration in a manner, because I know I can do better. I can make better sounds. I can make better particle effects and graphics. I can do better design of my actual game mechanics. I now have another reason to learn something. I have a very approachable small-scale goal, and that is to create a fight encounter that surpasses these examples. I have something to overcome. I have a challenge to overcome that doesn't involve me going too far beyond the bounds of what it is I'm trying to do right now. You could say my end result that I want to make is very, very ambitious, because it's something no company has done yet. Create a good third-person action game. But I'm going to try to, and the way I'm going to do it is by managing my workload and managing my expectations. There are things I can and can't do. But as long as I focus on improvement, then my passion won't burn out as easily. Because if you can mark your progress by self-improvement, rather than how complete your project is, then every time you put effort into the project, you will find fulfillment. Because every single time you put effort into something, you will improve. You will improve. You'll become a little bit faster. You'll become a little bit more comfortable. And that will help you actually advance the project, more so than throwing yourself at a wall. And that is how you approach ambition.
Well, I think that's a strong point to sort of wrap everything up with, or at least wrap everything we've talked about so far up, because the whole point of discussing ambition in the first place in an environment such as this, at least for my money, is being able to say, oh, the Discord overlay broke. You can hear me, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. Cool. Functioning software.
Good old Discord.
Yeah. So we were talking about ambition, right? And we gave a bunch of examples of how we've evolved over the years, tools and methodologies and brain hacks we've used to try and push ourselves over the edge, and with the express goal of lining up and laying out our philosophies, how we came to these positions, with the hope that it will be useful for other people. But I think it's even useful for ourselves just to look back at what we used to do. It's not always a pleasant viewing experience, just like you mentioned. Looking back at your content when it comes to those StarCraft 2 casts was probably not the best experience you've ever had when watching and listening to videos, but you were able to contrast that with what you've experienced more recently, what you've produced more recently. And it's the same deal with me bringing up Inconsummate. Of course, it's not a pleasant experience in the sense that what you would want it to be anyways. Like, I find it quite funny, but it's not a situation where it's like, oh yeah, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to be known for. I don't really want to be known for, some of the dialogue and some of the briefings and some of the cutscenes and just the way that it was paced. And most especially the way that the gameplay loop wound up being made manifest, because I found out, as I was a different example, I suppose, than the Occult System video that I was referencing earlier, but a friend of mine recently played it, like some months ago, and he actually streamed it to me while I was just watching and trying to give him advice, where he's not a very great player, especially with the Zerg race, and it is a Zerg campaign. And so when he was facing difficulty, I actually found it difficult to recommend him strategies that wouldn't just completely spoil the experience and hard counter what the AI was doing. Basically, I found it difficult to recommend him a strategy that would work, because the only strategies that would work are the strategies that I built into the map. And that is where I constantly critique other people for designing campaigns that have these developer-ordained strategies that you can use to win and pretty much nothing else. Yet here I was face-to-face with an experience that was not unlike those, that was very similar to those. And just looking at the way that I've experienced projects since then, looking at the way that I've evolved as a designer, and answering questions about such things as, how do you even get to the point where you're theory crafting these experiences? How do you get to the point where you are considering what to do and how to produce such content? People ask me some of these types of questions when I'm doing my mod streams and showcasing some of the stuff that I'm working on. And obviously it's in very alpha form. It's not finished. It's sometimes a blank canvas with me tooling around. It's sometimes me fucking around in Photoshop making some custom tiles for a specific blend or for a specific kind of terrain so that I can showcase an environment. But just, having that on display, having that on showcase introduces people to a different kind of development cycle. One that doesn't really reflect any of the previous work that I've released. And it's one of those weird things where maybe I'll always exist in this sort of perpetual limbo where until a project of mine comes out, you're not going to see any example of the arguments that I put forth as being accurate, because some of the arguments I put forth are AI are super important. Most people agree with a lot of the stuff that I say. AI is super important. You really should tell your story through your gameplay. You shouldn't have microsections. You shouldn't have gimmicks. You shouldn't have all this other stuff. Very, very basic stuff. We've rehashed it countless times. But where's the evidence? Where's the example of that in action? Where's the example of this thought process taken to its logical conclusion? Right. All we have is this stuff that doesn't fit these boundaries, that leaves people dissatisfied. So for all I know, right, and I don't think this is the case at all because I've already played some pre-release shit that I've made and it seems pretty promising. But for all we know, I'm horribly mistaken about all of this stuff. And all of these theory crafting, these thought experiments, the idea that you should be designing your game in a certain way, maybe that'll all fall flat. I really doubt it, but maybe it will just wind up being a failed experiment. And that's what it'll go down in history as, just a footnote, an interesting but ultimately flawed and failed experiment in the realm of an RTS. So the point is that nothing is guaranteed. And yet I'm still slaving away at this stuff, working on it very diligently, because I don't care really what the result is. I do care, in a sense. It's kind of a misnomer to say that, but that's not the reason why I'm doing it. I'm not doing it for the result. I'm doing it because I envision this as a higher quality product than anything I've played before. I want to play a higher quality product than anything I've ever played before. That's it. Those are the two things that contribute to my, like you had that diagram from Blueprint that you had me show people, and as an example of what was so intimidating to you. Well, in that case, if you're designing like visual logic AI in that sense, or just programming in general, then in this case you only got two of those fucking things to get to me working on this stuff. And the first box or whatever is, I want to play something good. And the second box is, I think this will be good. And that's all you really need to get started anyways. You obviously need the skills to produce what you think will be good. You need to have the thoughts in the first place. You need to conceive of things as works in progress or glass ceilings or room for improvement. A lot of people just take StarCraft as the be-all end-all. Some people take fucking StarCraft 2 for that or Warcraft 3 for that. So, there's some people are just lost in the world, man. But the bottom line is that you can find ways to change your mindset so that you can better harness the energy, the gamer fuel, the developer fuel that you were talking about earlier, that is this drive and motivation and the ambition that helps you keep through the hardships that you're undoubtedly going to have. I mean, it really is trite to say it, but nothing worth doing is easy in the first place. And I don't think that anybody who has any actual dreams, who it feels a calling, feels so because it's easy. Usually people settle for what's easy. Usually people are surprised pleasantly when something is easy, but they either settle for an easy solution to a problem that they knew has a better but more difficult solution, or they put in the hard yards and actually do the work. It's very rare to see any middle ground, and that's such an example. And I don't know. I just think it's an interesting thought experiment to have on its own, whether or not ambition is, something that just some people will never have, or whether it needs to be cultivated. Hopefully this podcast helps to do one of those things. Anyways, it helps to either show you that you were barking up the wrong tree in the first place, because it doesn't get better. There is no hack. There's no cheat. You just have to work. You have to do the work, and you have to, there's ways you can optimize your workflow, but there is still going to be a workflow. It's not going to be magically done overnight. And I always, I do always joke about one day I'm just going to drink, a lot of energy drinks and make a campaign in a day. But the irony of that, or the reason why that's funny in the first place, is just because it's ludicrous in many ways. I know it takes time. I know it takes a long time to make the shit that I want to make, and it really will. I don't think that'll ever change. The only time you'll ever see any change in that is if we get artificial intelligence to help do all the work for us, and all we are just directors at that point. But that's obviously a completely different topic. So either this podcast hopefully helped you understand what your ambitions and dreams actually are, and where you're going to try to go, and how you're going to try to harness those. Or the podcast helped you realize you actually don't have ambition. You were barking up the wrong tree in the first place. And either one is fine. Not everybody is meant to be creative. Not everybody is meant to make something truly great. And I don't think that you should put that pressure on yourself when you, especially if you don't really have any experience in the scene. But I also, like, it's a double-edged sword, because I don't want to discourage anybody from doing that. I don't want to discourage anybody from going through the hard yards. That's not what explaining that it's going to be difficult is meant to do. It's meant to weed out people who don't actually give a fuck. It's meant to say, hey, we all had to go through this shit. We all had to do this stuff. That's how you get good in the first place, is by putting in the hard yards and actually doing the time. And you can't learn, most people can't learn any other way. Obviously, you might learn faster than me. You might learn slower than Mesk. I don't know. But the bottom line is, you need some work you need to actually do some work to figure out where you slot in that sense, and where maybe your ceiling is right now, and how you can improve that ceiling, how you can bust through that, and continue upward on an upward trajectory. And so, yeah, I mean, ambition is definitely
shaft.
What? Shaft?
Up the shaft.
Shaft?
Climb the shaft.
Master the shaft? Master
Finding
your
ambition
destiny?
can be really difficult, though. Like,
Oh, yeah.
I think like a lot of these people who really struggle with making, like, especially these StarCraft 2 people, I would say not a single one of them actually had passion in StarCraft 2. I think they might have a passion in a creative venture, but it's not making campaigns or mods or whatever. I think they have to find something else. And that can be really difficult. Like, it took me 9 years to realize I was never going to actually enjoy working with StarCraft 2. And no matter how much I learned or how much I thought I could do, I just was never actually going to enjoy it. And I couldn't have ambition for something I really didn't enjoy. I couldn't have passion for it. So that actually made me feel terrible. That worked against me trying to force myself to do it. But I think that here, this is going to, like, it's definitely going to change. And I think I might find something again. I really have to change a lot to try to find that something again. And it's like, this isn't my, like, what I would consider like my first choice of what I should do. Like, logically speaking, if you're struggling to make a project, why would you go and try to make something harder? Like, a
Yeah.
lot harder.
Right.
Like, that doesn't seem to make any sense. But I also think I need to be actually challenged in a different way. StarCraft 2 will challenge me in how much I'm willing to put up with bullshit and tedium. I released that second Apex J video. That should give you a little hint of the absolute absurdity of dealing with StarCraft 2. Things like there are billboards not even being UV'd correctly for particles. And all the innumerable fucking issues importing stuff as well. That's not to speak of the editor crashing when previewing a string, for example. But like to look at, like, half of that video is basically dealing with bullshit. And trying to, like, undo the bullshit Blizzard has done with our models. Like, just their example assets are just full of just idiocy. Meanwhile, Epic has given us these Paragon assets. They claim they're worth $17 million. I don't know how they figure that. But this information is all neatly laid out, and I've learned a fair bit from it already. And I'm probably going to use one of them to make my first opponent with. And I've already got, like, all the tools I need to do that. Like, there's this distinct, drastic difference in how these people deal with things, and that alone changes how I perceive it. And it, like, a large chunk of this actually came back to a conversation we had a while ago where you said you should try something different. And I thought, well, the only thing that's different in this domain that I haven't done is try to get into, like, C++ and Blueprints. C++ is definitely too hard for me to get into right now, but Blueprints is basically Visual C++. Once I learn enough Blueprints, I can probably start, like, adapting more expensive systems into C++ and integrate the two and go from there, because they're very fundamentally the same in many respects.
Right, it's a translatable skill.
That's eventually where I decided to make that decision from, actually, because I thought, well, if I haven't succeeded in this route for 9 years, then yes, dramatic change is necessary.
Well, think about it. It's interesting that you bring that up, too, because I actually was just struck with a realization as you were talking about that you were talking about you needed to be challenged in a different way. Well, what do we both want out of a game? We want something that challenges us. It's almost like where what we really want is just challenge out of life, challenge to grow, and challenge to improve. And I think that's what sets people apart generally. Is there's a lot of people who just want, like, they've been through whatever shit they've been through. They've had to deal with whatever hardships they've had to deal with. And as a result, they have no fucking drive left in them. They've been sucked fucking dry. And they just really, they want the easiest way, the path of least resistance. They want to distract themselves as much as possible, or that at that point, like it's sort of like you need to improve in the first place. You need to want to improve in order to improve. It doesn't just happen accidentally. Like you might find out accidentally just by chance that you do actually want that because of the stars aligned and you had the perfect situation. But I actually think, and this is a criticism that I get all the time, is that I link shit that's about like designing a game or a mod or critiquing a piece of media, like in a review or something. I link some sort of creative expression with just how you exist as a human. And I do think that they're all linked. And so I understand why some people think that's like a little too lofty of a premise to talk about in a podcast like this or whatever. But I actually think that it is all linked. Like, there's got to be something to it that we both want challenge. We both want like an experience, and it links back to the ambition in the first place, because you're talking about how the information control and the way that you can learn and the methodology available, the tools available to actually improve your workflow as opposed to just sucking dick in StarCraft 2, that they exist in Unreal. And then you compare that to StarCraft 2, and it's almost like people who made Unreal had some sort of ambition to make something worthwhile to use in the first place. Just like a video game, it's almost like they had the ambition to make a workable system. You know what I mean? Like they actually designed it so that you could do something with it, not just for whatever like boilerplate hackneyed utility they needed. And most people will probably listen to me talk about this and think I'm just describing something super obvious, I think. But it really is an interesting twist on the whole topic, because we're talking about ambition for making a project, but I really think that there's just ambition for life in general, and it's how you channel that and where you allocate that ambition in the first place. I don't know if it's a finite resource, but I do definitely, I've seen people who are just done and they're checked out and they need to either find their way back or they're going to live just a hollow existence for a while. And not to get too fucking personal or whatever, but I genuinely worried that at some point you would just fucking decide to pull the plug on the whole operation, not just like any particular project. And I'm glad that you found something that you think. Yeah, I'm glad you found something you think will be a little bit more challenging in that sense, a little bit more promising, and something that you can translate the skills out of. Just like you would translate skills learned from a first mission of an RTS into a second mission, or a first boss battle into a second boss battle with the same opponent, or whatever the case may be. Like, I do think it is all linked, and I definitely think that what we're talking about here, it just makes sense. It just, like, it might not be common sense in a sense, because I haven't heard too many people talk about it at any way, but maybe they're just saying it in different manners and I'm not picking up on it. I do think that there's a really key takeaway from this particular episode is just that you don't necessarily have to have ambition or passion for producing RTS content or gaming content, but there's got to be something that you like. There's got to be something that you want, that, like, the age-old question of why the fuck are you here in the first place comes into play if you have nothing to channel your free time on, basically, for lack of a better term. So I don't know what you think about all that. It's kind of a smorgasbord.
Well, there's another distinction, because this was something I was going to say, that the challenge thing is very familiar sounding to me, because it's basically what you want out of a game.
Right.
But the other part that I was trying to word in my head before I talked about it was there is a distinction between challenge and tedium. And
right, absolutely.
That goes for both cases as well.
Well, it's like the distinction between renaming thousands of files for an image to get your frames done than just making your model from the scratch. Like, it's probably way less. Well, I don't know if it's less man hours. It might be the same amount of man hours, but it's a completely different experience. Like, you learn completely different things from it.
Yeah. So, or using a script to rename them or whatever. But
right.
like I said, like the barrier between StarCraft, it's you don't learn anything dealing with this bullshit. You are just going through the grind of tedium to fix stuff from weird conversion issues, or deal with the slowness of the editor, or having to close your map and reload your mod, and then close your mod and reload your map to test it, and go on back and forth, waiting for upwards of like 4 or 5 minutes each time. Like, that's not a learning experience. That's not an engagement. That's you waiting or going through tedious stuff. Every time you run into barriers like this, like that's why UX is such a big deal. Because user experience is the most important thing when it comes to not just building a project, but learning how to make a project. And when you look at how data is structured in something like Unreal versus something like StarCraft 2, obviously they're worlds apart, because Blizzard doesn't have programmers, they don't have game designers. Epic has a few. There are companies actually pretty small, which is why they have so many things they need to do that they never actually do. But what we do have is something that, maybe it's not like the best implementation. Maybe it's not the most efficient, but it's an effort. It's a legitimate effort. Like going through the state machine thing here, it turned out that, because I had an issue with my character that I was trying to set up, I ported a Worgen from World of Warcraft, and I was like, I'm going to replicate the system where the upper body blends into the lower body when you're walking and attacking at the same time. But I had issues where it was sliding me around a lot for some reason when I'm attacking, and I still don't really 100% understand why. So I needed an actual reference. So I ended up getting the Paragon asset that I show in the screenshot. And it turns out the Epic's implementation was almost identical to mine functionally, except they cached the one pose that I did not cache. So I guess that's like, if you don't cache it, something weird happens. But it was also really weird saying their setup was like all tidy and clean compared to mine. And some of their stuff was done more efficiently than mine as well. Some of their nodes in one of the other graphs, the event graph, is a lot cleaner than mine, and saves a few steps and stuff like that. But it was just weird saying that the official solution was very similar to my solution. And because to me, that solution made sense. It was logical. But I've never had that epiphany with something with Blizzard. Like the Viper grab in StarCraft, it actually, I think it teleports something and then creates a duplicate unit and drags that duplicate around. And it is actually regarded. I believe there's a developer note somewhere that it is some voodoo. Because they couldn't just grab and move the unit, so they had to make a huge hack for it. So yeah, like that's one example. But all this stuff in StarCraft 2 is just like you wouldn't think it works like that because it's so fucking stupid. But that's because that's the kind of engine and that's the kind of people working with it, that they don't do things logically. Like the way the AI is set up, where it's a million fucking conditions that tries to input rate the player and builds roaches to counter void rays anyways. Like none of this stuff they do to reach that point makes any sense, and the end result doesn't make any sense. So like just from a learning perspective, none of that makes any sense. It's very hard to actually break into that because you pretty much have to come up with your own solutions and have no real way to validate them other than throwing yourself at it. Whereas this, I walked into this and I looked at the Epic example in this Paragon asset, and I was like, that's just like what I've got, except they're caching this one thing I'm not caching. I cached it, and lo and behold, my problems were fixed. So that was like, oh, okay. All right. I'm apparently a AAA developer now.
How does it feel?
But that's like, I didn't know what I was doing. Like, I don't know the first fucking thing about what I'm doing. I just did what I felt was logical. It was apparently the right solution. I was just missing a step. And that's kind of weird because historically to this point, I've been doing everything wrong. I've been driving HKS insane with how wrong I've been doing everything. But somehow this one thing I did actually right somehow. And like the way everything is laid out just sort of made sense to do it that way. So it like I'm coming from a long line of dealing with dumb shit from Sins of a Solar Empire to StarCraft 2. So it's such a small little thing, but it's kind of one of those little things that validates your decision behind deciding to try again. And yeah, I don't really have too much more to add to that because it's a big thing. But the tedium thing really does play into that because, like I said, if you're trying to avoid working like subconsciously, like you go off to watch fucking like scat film or something instead of working on your campaign. If you find yourself keep doing that, it's because you don't want to work on your campaign. Like there's no way around it. Like you either got to take a break or you got to rethink your priorities.
Could just be German.
Could just be German.
Well, I think that is a fine way to close our discussion out, though, because it is an important addendum talking about tedium. That is a very different thing. Your passion to put up with it is admirable in many respects. Your passion to put up with renaming thousands of files. But like I was talking about when I was first giving the example of renaming Boko from Priority Survive a million times, that's like, having to do that, especially for just a placeholder asset. Like I look back at that and I recognize that it's great that I am dedicated enough to do that, but it's not the best use of your time. And if, faced with the situation where I had to throw myself at that for many, many more times, especially in quick succession, in order to move on to the next phase of the project's development, that would really become draining. And maybe I wouldn't quit, but I certainly wouldn't be having the time of my life doing it, right? So that's where people who, like, you got to recognize how dedicated you actually are initially when you first open up, you first walk into your project. You got your dream, you got your ambition to do it. How finite or infinite is your ambition? How does it feel? Like, what does it actually look like to you as the developer? You got to answer that question as soon as you walk into your project, because for all you know, and you got to be honest with yourself. And you might even take if you're rounding, right? It's not an exact science, obviously, figuring out how long you'd be able to put up with shit like that. But being able to have a ballpark estimate will go a long way to making sure that you don't lead yourself down a rabbit hole of endless frustration and ass pain, just so that you can come away from the project bitter and leaving it unfinished and feeling like nothing's really changed. So I think that's definitely one of the main takeaways overall is don't sign yourself up for a lot of tedium. Don't not shy away with it if you can muster the ability to do so. Like if you can deal with the tedium that's necessary, then by all means. But if it's not actually necessary, and you're just, some people use tedium to avoid, like, to justify not doing any work in the first place, right? And so they say, oh, it's too hard. But like, there is a solution out there that you could use that would still yield high quality results and would do so in less time. Maybe you just need to learn some scripting or do something else. And so there's things that are within reach that you probably just don't consider. And whether that's conscious or not, whether you're honest, like consciously denying yourself the opportunity to do that, or you're just saying, well, I actually don't know. Like, ignorance is an excuse in this particular case for the first time you do it. That remains to be seen. That's something that you're going to have to answer on a case-by-case basis. But definitely walking into a project, walking into a new environment to make a project, these are important questions to ask yourself, and you'll have past experience, odds are. And so you'll be able to judge based on that. But definitely a good point to bring up, because I probably never would have remembered to bring that particular point up about how some things are just really endlessly tedious, like, especially when you're dealing with fan-made tools and stuff. But sounds like you found a decent enough alternative for Unreal, or with Unreal, I should say. Yep. So, yeah. Well, I think that's it. So if that is indeed everything, we can say our goodbyes and tune back in for our Hong Kong special.
Hong Kong, honky!
Bye.